Good morning. All right, I got some feedback there. Good stuff. How many people here were at DerbyCon? Good show of hands. How many went to the Next Gen Reconnaissance talk at DerbyCon? One or two. Okay, not bad. So not a whole lot of overlap. That's good. I did give a similar talk at DerbyCon. However, I've done some new things with the tools. I've added a few slides here and there. So if you did see it there are some differences that make it worth being here. This is Next Generation Web Reconnaissance. Okay, so who am I? TimTomes. I'm a senior security consultant at Black Hills Information Security. I also go by the handle Landmaster53. Most people know me by that than my actual name, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. I'm a community instructor for SANS. I teach Security 542, which is their web application penetration testing course. Next time I'll be teaching it is in Monterey, California in next March. I'm a security blogger. I used to blog exclusively on landmaster53.com. Now all my stuff is cross-posted over to paul.com, which is, obviously what Larry mentioned earlier, being a contributor to the podcast. We got a couple of paul.com guys here, and they are a sponsor. I'm a father of two, husband of one, Christian veteran, spent 9 years in the United States Army, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And I love Python, and by that I exclusively mean the programming language Python. So some quick credits. John Strand, many of you know him. He came up with the initial idea of Pushpin, which led to this version 1 of Pushpin that I credit Ethan Robish with. Basically last year, about halfway through, it was July last year, John had this idea to do some of the stuff we're going to talk about later, and Ethan Robish was one of his interns. He said, hey, you got a few hours to throw a tool together for me? They threw something quick together. He pushed it out as kind of a proof of concept idea, and basically I took that and developed it further. We'll talk about the tool towards the end of the talk. But I want to credit these guys for the initial idea and the initial version of the tool. And I also want to give a shout out to Rob Dixon, who did a lot of the testing for me when I was developing this, and he's also really guided me in terms of features and new things to add to it to really make it useful in multiple areas, not just penetration testing. So a quick agenda for today. Talk a little bit about what is reconnaissance. We'll define it a few ways and why it's important. What's the problem with reconnaissance as it currently stands? We'll talk about a tool that solves some of those problems. And we'll take a new look, a new perspective on reconnaissance from a physical point of view. Talk about the tool Pushpin and actually publicly release it for the first time. At DerbyCon, it was privately released to those that went to the talk. But we'll be publicly releasing it today. And then we'll have Rob come up here and talk about a use case scenario for the tool, more from an investigative point of view, but it's really, really neat and actually turned out to be a lot more powerful than I initially envisioned. So we'll have Rob come up and do that a little bit later. So whether you're doing network penetration testing or whether you're doing web application penetration testing, reconnaissance is an important step within the methodology, right? If you know, most of you are pretty much aware of the methodology, you may know the step. You may have your own personal opinions about it, but I think after we discussed it today, you'll realize how important it is. But regardless, it is a step within the methodology. It's part of the information gathering portion of network pen testing, and it's by name reconnaissance in the web application penetration testing methodology. So it's there, but what is it defined as? Well, Merriam-Webster defines it as a preliminary survey to gain information. Very, very general, right? From a pen testing point of view, I look at this following definition to be a little bit more accurate. We're going to use open sources to gain information about the target without making direct contact. All right, now, without making direct contact is the key point here. Because as we look at different purposes for reconnaissance, and this is a list of purposes that I came up with. It's not standardized, but I think it fits the bill pretty well. Is validating scope, gathering information for social engineering, finding vulnerable code, and identifying weaknesses. Now, in terms of validating scope, this is where it's important that we're not making direct contact. How many of you are pen testers? Got a few in here are pen testers. How many of you do any kind of security testing at all? You don't have to be considered a pen tester, but you do security testing. Okay, so a few hands. Do you scope your own engagements? Yes? Maybe not. Somebody maybe scopes it for you. How many of you have been on an engagement where you have identified hosts that belong to the target but weren't actually within the scope that was given to you? Quite a few times, right? Happens a lot. How many of you have stumbled across hosts that did not belong to the target but were in the scope that was given to you? Right? That's an issue, right? These are problems. So we need to be able to validate a scope. Let me tell you a quick story. So I was doing a pen test once Not with the company that I'm with now, but at one point in time, and I wasn't scoping my own engagements, I was given a scope. I go to this particular range, I start snooping around, I go through the methodology, and I start gaining access to network devices and noticing that the host names were matching the names of other companies. I go back to the organization and I say, hey, look, you gave me this scope, this set of IP addresses. I'm finding hosts that look like they belong to other companies. And they say to me, oh, our IPs are in that range. We don't actually own that range, right? That could be a major legal issue. Now luckily enough, we reached out, we contacted the people whose host we did compromise, and they were cool about it, and we got it all straightened out. But the bottom line there is there's liability issues there, there's legal issues there. Those are major problems, and we need to be able to validate our scope using reconnaissance techniques to prevent that particular issue. In terms of gathering information for social engineering, we're looking for email addresses, we're looking for first names, last names, phone numbers, addresses, the typical standard stuff, right, for social engineering attacks. Finding vulnerable code or techniques. How many people here are developers? And when I say developer, I don't care if you write a script to automate something, or if you're doing web design or actually hardcore developing applications. How many people write any code at all? Right. How many of us go on the internet and say Stack Overflow or something like that and say, hey, I need a piece of help with this particular code, and you cut and paste some code in there? How many people go out to those same websites and look for other code snippets to help you accomplish something within your program? Lots of us, right? So why can't we use that information to actually go out and try to find other code that may actually be being used in production environments that are vulnerable, using something like Google Groups? So I will tell you that I've done this before on a pen test where I've gone to Google Groups and I've searched for code that belonged to a particular domain, right, which was the company that I was attacking, and I found production, internet-facing production code, web-based code with SQL injection and cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in it. I had an exploitable SQL injection vulnerability before I ever even touched the network. So you have that kind of, sometimes you'll have that kind of power going into the pen test, and that's what we're looking for. And as far as technologies go, so we're scouring the internet for, the companies put out, say, requests for resumes when they need people for a particular job. So there's a couple of pieces of information I can get from that. I can get things like what types of technologies are being used within the company. So if I find a request for resume that says, hey, we need a PHP expert, well, I know PHP is probably being used. And what's the other piece of information that I know? They're probably lacking in that area because they need they need a developer with that particular skill set. So there's little pieces of information, little tidbits, little nuggets that we want to collect and begin to build as we get into the pen test. And then identifying weaknesses in physical security, which we'll touch on more a little bit later. So what's the problem with reconnaissance? Well, in many cases, it's overlooked or completely skipped. And there's a couple reasons why, a couple reasons that I hear quite often. First is when people think reconnaissance, they think physical, right? They think long-range reconnaissance. We're taking pictures, we're reviewing stuff. And so if the physical, I guess, element is not a part of the pen test, or it's not in scope, then a lot of folks say, well, I don't need to do reconnaissance because it's a physical thing and that's not in scope. It's kind of a lame excuse, but I hear that sometimes. A lot of internal teams say, hey, look, man, I work for this company. I already know everything there is to know. All right? They honestly believe that, and they'll tell you that. And from an external or third-party perspective, what's our biggest constraint as a penetration tester? What's the one thing we normally run into? Time, right? We don't have enough time to get everything done that we want to get done. So a lot of third-party penetration testers that I've talked to, and when asked them about their perspective of reconnaissance, it's the first thing that gets dropped based on this time constraint. Right? Don't have enough time to do it. It appears to be the least important part of the methodology, so I'll just skip right over it and jump into the testing. Well, my argument is this. For the internal teams, you never know everything. I can tell you that I cannot remember a single pen test that I've been on where I've not identified a machine through reconnaissance that the target didn't realize was there. So typically it's an outward internet-facing box within the DMZ that's hosting some sort of service that they forgot was there. All right? Happens all the time. That's a bad excuse. You never know everything. From third-party or external penetration testers, the one thing I hear is, or my reasoning for needing to do this is you're going to go back and do it anyway, right? So you've got, if you're doing social engineering engagements, you're going to need to go back and get it. For everybody, for all parties involved, it's just good to know what the rest of the world knows. So if you work for the company, you can't defend what you don't know exists. right? So it's you have to know this information. From a pen tester's point of view, it's your duty to take this information to your customer, right? We're trying to show them all of their vulnerabilities, a holistic view of their attack. I lost the word. But anyway, as penetration testers, we need to be able to take this information to our client. So my solution is, let's not skip it. Let's automate it, and in some cases, let's automate it better than it's being done now. Okay. So here you see the purposes of recon I talked about a few minutes ago. As we move through the presentation, I'm going to address each one of these, and we'll talk a little bit about either a technique or tool that helps us automate it or automate it better as we move through for that particular step of the methodology. So the first thing is host enumeration. Now, when I talk about host enumeration, I'm not talking about using Nmap to scan the environment and actually begin to discover hosts, right? Because we're still not making direct contact here. We're talking about things like using whois lookups to find authoritative name servers, individuals that are administrators to that particular domain, things of that sort. Now, DNS falls into this category, but DNS is kind of tricky because when we talked about not making direct contact, authoritative name servers typically reside on the network. All right, so we got to be careful about that. But I still consider this a part of reconnaissance because we can use that to gain information. Tools like Fierce and DNS Recon, which Carlos Perez has been working on. So there's things like that, and then there's some relatively new approach is using Google AdSense and Google Analytics IDs to do reverse lookups on other websites using the same thing. So this is kind of neat. 79tools.com, eWhois.com have the ability to do this. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like. But basically, you can plug a domain into one of these tools, and it does all of this other stuff for you as well. As you can see up here, you got a whois tab, so you can go and you can look at the whois records. You can click the server tab, you can see host information, banner grabbing information, stuff like that. Click on the IP there in the IP area, and it will show you every other domain that's hosted on the same IP address. And down here at the bottom, you'll see Google AdSense ID, Google Analytics ID. If it has a link next to it, you click on it, it will show you all the other websites with that same ID. Now, who does that ID typically belong to? The developer, right? So if I've got a developer of this particular site which I'm attacking, and he has other sites as well, there's a decent chance that those sites may belong to the same organization. So we need to do this lookup, see what those hosts are, validate they're a part of the scope. If not, maybe they are. Maybe we need to just scope a little bit. So this is still part of scope validation. But by far, my favorite way to do host enumeration through open sources is using advanced search operators. How many people here use Google? If you didn't raise your hand, you're lying. Right? Everybody uses Google, right? Unless you have some extreme form of paranoia. So I wouldn't be surprised if Larry doesn't use it, because based on his talk this morning, he's got a level of paranoia that far surpasses mine. But so search operators in Google. The one we're going to talk about here is the site operator. So are we familiar with using the site operator to restrict all of our searches to a particular domain? All right. Well, I was sitting in actually the web penetration testing course for SANS a few years back when Kevin Johnson was teaching it, and he talked about this, and he had that second line up there, and it got me thinking, if I can say I want all the results from a particular domain, but then I want to not return the results for a particular subdomain of that domain, what's to say I can't continue to do that for all the particular domains within a search until I get no results from Google, but I've got a search bar filled with these -site:/www, -site:/forensics, -site:/admin, right? Basically what I've done there is I've used Google to enumerate all of the public-facing web hosts for a particular domain. Not bad, right? It works pretty well. So this is a neat technique, but you can imagine it would become pretty cumbersome to do it manually. So what I did was about a year ago, I wrote a tool called Jixfer, and it's been out there for a while, and it does a pretty good job of this, right? It just enumerates hosts using Google. It works pretty well. There's a link to it, but don't write that down yet because we've got more to talk about here. Bing, Yahoo, same thing. They both have this similar search operator, and believe it or not, they present different results. Now, there's typically a good bit of overlap between all of these different search engines, but I've seen Yahoo and Bing come up with things Google doesn't find. I see Google find things that Bing and Yahoo doesn't find. So I incorporated this into the tool, and now it uses all of these different search engines. And then there's wonderful Showdown. How many people here use Showdown before? The developer of Showdown isn't here, is he? All right, too bad. But Showdown has also got this host name search operator, which allows us to do something very, very similar. We can say hostname colon, give it a domain, and it will return everything that Shodan knows about for that particular domain. The really cool thing about this is we're getting more than just web. We get SMTP servers, right? We get mail, we get FTP, all kinds of neat stuff, Telnet. And here you can see we got an open SSH, we got an SSH server that's turned back for sans.org, st.sans.org. Jixfer is not going to find that. Shodan will. So I started compiling all this stuff into the script and thinking, man, I'm doing a whole lot of stuff here for reconnaissance. Maybe I should start building a framework. But at this point, it's just host enumeration, so I elected to not do that at this point. Next purpose of reconnaissance, gathering information for social engineering. So where are the people at on the internet? How many people have LinkedIn accounts? Quite a few of us, right? What makes LinkedIn so attractive to the penetration tester? Anybody want to make a guess? So it's a professional social networking site, right? People are going to tend to put more accurate, more precise information about themselves on there. So if you go to MySpace, you go to Facebook, you go to something like that, you may get handles, you may get surnames, or you may get just somebody uses a nickname on there. You're not necessarily going to get accurate information. You go to LinkedIn.com, or you go to LinkedIn, somebody's LinkedIn profile, and everybody lies, not everybody. A lot of people lie on their resume, right? So you may not get accurate information in terms of their professional experience, but things like their name, the company that they work for, companies that they used to work for, you're probably going to get accurate information from that point of view because it's almost self-policing, right? When you work for a particular company, that company probably is going to go check the people that are registered on their LinkedIn as employees and maybe police that up a little bit. So you can rely on this information a little bit more you can other social networking sites, which makes it very, very valuable to penetration testers who are working in the professional environment, right? So there's LinkedIn, great place to find people. Who here has played with Jigsaw? Okay, just a few hands. So this is kind of neat. You're going to love this. Jigsaw is a cloud-based customer relationship management software. It was bought out. It used to be independent, but it was bought out by Salesforce in 2010 for about $150 million. And you'll see shortly why it's worth it to them. And there's a couple things that make Jigsaw really, really awesome. The first thing is the fact that it's crowdsourced. So if you go to jigsaw.com and you start snooping around and looking at how you actually can get contact information from it and how you give contact information to it, you'll notice that there's things like leaderboards that rank people according to how many contacts they've submitted to LinkedIn. I mean, not to LinkedIn, to Jigsaw. You'll notice things like contest boards where they actually give monetary prizes for people that submit the most contacts in a month, the second most contacts in a month. Monetary prizes for submitting information. And why does that work? Because as a basic user of Jigsaw, as a non-paying, I've got an account, I can go and give a contact, what Jigsaw considers a contact, to them, and in return they will give me access to a contact from their database, right? So they're getting it from both ends. Not only are they getting everyone in the community to contribute contacts to them, but they're turning around and not just giving them away for free, but you can also purchase access to Jigsaw and get access to the entire database and all of their contacts, right? The other part of it is what we want, the part of Jigsaw that we need is free, absolutely free. And I know I said you pay for it, but you pay for things like email addresses, actual mail addresses, phone numbers, and things like that. Jigsaw has that information, and you can pay to have it, but we don't necessarily need it. So here's the other cool thing. Anybody here got a call from Jigsaw by any chance? So just to kind of prove this a little bit further, I did get a call from Jigsaw. Somebody submitted my contact information to them, and they called me and said, hey, this is so-and-so from Jigsaw. I need to validate your contact information that was submitted to us. This is for real. They're actually doing that. And so if you submit a contact, they will actually call that person, try to validate it. If it's validated, then they'll give you a free voucher to go pull your own contact information out. So that kind of goes back and fills it in. But everything, the information that they give away to free to everyone is first name, last name, and job title. And it's searchable by company. There's not a whole lot more we need when we're talking social engineering than that. I can take a first name and a last name and a job title and come up with a target list for a spear phishing campaign very, very, very quickly. So the information that we want as pen testers is free. Okay, so I took these two different sources and I built some tools out of it. The first one was a LinkedIn script, a link that uses LinkedIn, a script that uses LinkedIn to harvest contacts. All right. Now this has been done a lot. But the problem is, in most cases, it's being done incorrectly. So I've gone out and I've looked at a lot of the tools, analyzed a lot of the tools that are doing this, and basically what they do is they use that Google site search operator, and they say, hey, I want to search Google for site:linkedin.com space, and in quotation marks, the name of the company. And so you get back all results on the LinkedIn domain, which has that particular company in the text. Now you're going to get some positive results there, but what's one obvious issue with that? Anybody want to take a shot at it? How about the fact that not everybody that comes back is actually going to be an employee? In fact, I found that about 1 in 50 to 100 are actual positive hits when you do something like that. And the reason is, if say I go and I do that same search, linkedin.com, site:linkedin.com for the company Accuvant. Well, how many people on LinkedIn are going to have Accuvant as a company that they follow, or as a previous employer, or something like that? A whole ton of them, right? So we had to figure out a way to narrow this down. And the way that I did it is once I actually do that Google search, I take each one of those hits and I actually go to that hit, go to that particular link, and I parse out of the LinkedIn page whether or not the company name actually exists within their job title. If it actually exists within the job title, it returns it as a hit, and it drastically reduces the amount of false positives. Now, it takes a while to get through that because a lot of times you're going to have tens to hundreds of thousands of hits when you search for something like IBM, right? You're going to have an incredible amount of hits. So it takes a while to sift through that data, but it will do it, and it'll drastically reduce the amount of false positives because I'm confirming employment in the company. So Rob busted my bubble at DerbyCon, He comes up to me after my talk, or maybe it was right before my talk. In fact, I think it was right before my talk, and he said, dude, somebody else is already doing this with Jigsaw. I was like, you got to be kidding me. In any case, there's a Ruby script that does this with Jigsaw. If you prefer Ruby over one tool that kind of combines all this stuff together written in Python, this link right here will take you to a Jigsaw script that does very similar to what mine does, and it will dump user or harvested contacts in a very similar way. So it's another option that's out there. So at this point in time, I'm like, hey, now I've got enough tools that I can build a framework out of it. So I did. I went and I built a framework. It was modular and it worked pretty good. And then the night before DerbyCon, I said, yeah, screw this. I want to make it one single script. So I put it all back together into a single script. And then about a week ago, Rob brought me in on another project, which now is making me lean back towards turning it into a framework. So that's kind of for the future of the tool. You may see a framework come out a little bit later, which has a lot of the same functionality. But in any case, right now, it's one script that you have to download called ReconNG. So the help file, this is kind of what it looks like. Here's a couple things you can do. There's two modes you can run ReconNG in, and that's host enumeration mode, contact enumeration mode, based on the stuff that we just talked about. Independent of which mode you're running in, you can output all the information to a file. And the file output format is CSV, so it's very easily parsable. You can import it into a lot of your other tools. You can import it into Excel and manipulate it very easily. And you can also elect to run all modules under that particular mode, or you can go into the mode, drill down, and run specific modules. As you see under host enumeration mode, there's Jixfer, Bixfer, Yixfer, and Shodan modules, which I talked about. And then something new that I've added since DerbyCon is the ability to resolve all enumerated host names to IP addresses. So now not only do you have these hosts in the domain, but you also have the IP address that is resolved through DNS. So pretty cool. And it'll dump all that to a CSV for you. In contact enumeration mode, if you've got a company with a really general name, you can add specific keywords to the search here so that you can narrow it down. So if you go and you look up, say, sans.org through LinkedIn, you get a whole, or Jigsaw, you get a bunch of companies that come back with the letters S-A-N-S in them. So you say SANS with the keyword of security, the chances of you coming back with the actual SANS Institute's a little bit better. So I have that capability in there. And then the newest thing that ReconNG since DerbyCon that I'm really excited about is this LinkedIn authenticated module. So those that were at DerbyCon, how many of you went to Chris Gates and Mubix's talk? Carnage and Mubix's talk? Remember when they talked about that guy John that they created and just built this massive LinkedIn connection network? Right? Well, now you can use those credentials and use John to authenticate with ReconNG and pull contacts through them. And this uses the API, which is a heck of a lot faster than scraping web content. And it also doesn't violate the acceptable, well, I should say the end user license agreement for any of those particular websites. Right? So pretty neat stuff. In fact, what we've done at Black Hills Information Security, John Strand, the owner of the company, has an extensive connections network he's been building for years, talking ridiculous amount of contacts. So what we've done is we've taken his particular account created an OAuth token, which this script will do for you. Created an OAuth token, passed it around to the different consultants. So now we all use one particular account to harvest contacts through LinkedIn, and it works fantastic. So this I'm pretty excited about, and it works really well. I've gotten really good results out of it in recent pen tests. The other really neat thing about the contact harvesting portion of ReconNG is the mutation piece. So with all the contacts, you can do mutations of the results. And what I mean by that is you can take first name, first initial, last initial, and create email addresses and stuff out of it. I've got some pre-built mutations in there, as you can see on the slide. My favorite part of it is this ability to create custom mutations using those different strings down below. FILI for first initial, last initial, FNLN for first name, last name. You can put it all in a string, and the script will go in and substitute those particular pieces of information, and then that also gets added to that CSV output file. So if you already know that how their email address naming scheme is, when you go harvest contacts, you can go ahead and have it create the email address for you. So it's pretty neat stuff. All right, so the host enumeration portion, this is what it looks like. It's going to go through, it's going to use Google, Bing, Yahoo, Shodan, and then it's going to spit out, do a reverse lookup and spit out all the IP addresses for the particular domains. Pretty cool, right? Goes through, hammers all that, writes it to the CSV if you want to, and you have that information. And as you can see, there's some differences there between what they come up with. But in many cases, I've done things like sans.org and gotten back 44 subdomains, some of them with the name like dev, admin, and things like that, stuff that we would definitely be interested in as penetration testers. I seriously doubt Sans has enough developers to handle 44 subdomains, right? It makes me wonder how many of them do they actually know that exist out there. It's one of those examples of, in fact, Jixper is that tool, one of those tools that I use where I always find hosts that they don't know about using that. So it's pretty neat. Here's what the contact enumeration piece looks like. First, it'll go through and it'll look for Jigsaw. Now, the thing about Jigsaw is, those of you that have played with it, some of you haven't, when you go and you search Jigsaw, even through the web portal, the first thing you get back is a list of companies that match that search. Right. In some cases, there will only be one company until you'll have a one-to-one match, but in a lot of cases, you'll have to dump out a list of companies and then identify one by ID. So that's what this thing's doing up here first. In this case, there's a unique match, so it automatically fills it in. Then it goes and it dumps all the contacts that Jigsaw knows about, in this case for secure ideas. Then it goes to LinkedIn, and it does it to LinkedIn. Then it does a LinkedIn authenticated, dumps all those out, mutates the contacts, spits out your email addresses. And you have this format to the screen in standard out, which is pretty easily parsable, or you've got that great CSV that you can go import into one of those other tools that you use. So pretty handy. We use this in Black Hills Information Security to great success, and we have had really good results with it. So the final thing I want to talk about, the final purpose I want to cover, is this identifying weaknesses in physical security. All right. So as I said, I spent some time in the Army. I spent 9 years as an officer in the Army, and part of that time was spent as a red teamer, tiger teamer, whatever you want to call it, full spectrum penetration tester. So we did physical security, wireless, networking, social engineering. We did it all against Department of Defense organizations. And while I was doing this particular job, this is the definition of reconnaissance that we went by. This is out of Field Manual 7-92, a United States Army Field Manual 7-92. Reconnaissance is a mission to obtain information by visual observation or other detection methods, blah, 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 blah. Okay? The part that I want to highlight here is this other detection methods, right? So what about media sources as other detection methods, right? Things like Flickr, Picasa, and Instagram, which Instagram, as you can see, is new to the tool since DerbyCon. Videos from YouTube, social media from Twitter. And who here has heard of Oodle before? Anybody here played with Oodle? Oodle's like an online repository for classified ads, right? Whether you're selling stuff or you're looking for stuff, it kind of pulls them from all kinds of different places and it puts them in one place that makes it searchable. And they have an API, right? Why can't we use these pieces of information or information from these different media sources to conduct some physical reconnaissance? Well, we can, and it's because of geotagging, right? So geotagging, for those of you that don't know what it is, a particular device that you create one of these pieces of media with may have the ability to geolocate itself through whether it's GPS, global positioning system, Wi-Fi, cellular tower triangulation, whatever. There's multiple different ways it can do it. Basically what it does is it will geolocate itself and it will attach the coordinates, latitude and longitude, to this particular source of media. When you upload that piece of media to whether it be Flickr or YouTube or whatever, those APIs strip that information out of there and then make all their media searchable by that particular field, right, which is coordinates. So in most of these APIs, you can go there and you can search for these coordinates, this radius, and get back all of these pieces of media, these media sources, within that particular area. Right? So we're going to put all this together, this geotagging, all these different media sources, and build a tool out of it, right? And we're going to call that tool Pushpin. So like I said earlier, this is version 2. It's actually just a Python module with a wrapper, so if you don't like the wrapper that I've pre-built for you, you can just import it into the interpreter and use all the different classes as you see fit. Pushpin is the actual class. I believe each media source is a method within the class, so it's very, very flexible. I've built a schema for API synchronization, so it's incredibly easy to extend, right? So what I mean by this is the tool itself requires certain pieces of information to display the data that you need. It needs coordinates, obviously, right? It needs the link to the media, maybe the profile for the person, an actual profile name for the person that submitted the media. There's different pieces of information that the tool requires in order to generate output. If the API, if you've got an API in mind and it satisfies those requirements within the schema, then you can kick out a module for Pushpin in like 10 minutes. Really, really simple to kick out new modules as long as it matches the schema. So if you pull the tool down, you'll see the schema in there, and you can extend it very, very easily. The output is all self-contained, so it results in 2 HTML files. The support files for the HTML are all local, images, things of that sort. It's all local to the repository, and it does 2 pages. It provides 2 pages: a media page and a map page. So when you run the help for the tool, this is what it looks like. Real simple. You give it a latitude and longitude, you get it a radius, and hit enter, and it will go through and start collecting data from all these different APIs. You can also serialize and output all the data that you pull into a file so that you can pull that data back out and use it again at a later time. This is pretty handy. And it also allows you to, when you do that, filter for time. So say you do a dump of a particular area and it just goes and pulls as far back as it can. And as you're doing your investigation or whatever it is that you're doing with that particular information, your reconnaissance, you want to narrow down the time frame where you can import that data back in and filter by time, and it will only output the results within that time frame. So pretty cool. You can identify individual modules or run them all. The first thing that pops up when you run the tool is the media tab. This is the first thing you see. So kind of neat, right at the top it tells you, hey, these are the coordinates and the radius that you gave us, and then here's all the results I got for each of the modules that you ran. And so this tool is going to continue to extend off the right side of the screen. You can actually keep on scrolling for as many modules as you've activated. You can keep scrolling to the right and see the columns. Obviously, you can scroll down and see more results. So the page is fairly large canvas. Depending on your resolution in your monitor, you'll be able to see more or less of the content without moving around. But basically, each module has the same type of information it presents to you, right? It gives you the image, the video, or the tweet, the profile of the person that tweeted it or posted it, and the title of the media, of the picture, the title of the video, or the actual tweet content itself. And it also gives you the time of when it was up there. As you scroll over the page, you see the little map in the middle? As you scroll over each one of these sources, it pops up a little bit of map and puts a Pushpin right where it is on the map. Okay? So it's kind of neat, real fluid, real interactive as you're going through the page. So it's a neat way to look up information and get some and do some physical reconnaissance without ever actually being there. However, we want a more useful presentation of this, right? We want to be able to see trending. We want to be able to see clumps and groups and aggregate this information in a way that makes more sense. And that's what the mapping tab is for. So this is what the mapping tab looks like. It takes all that information from the media tab and it plots it on a map for you. You can click on these individual Pushpins and the same information will pop up that was on the media side, right? Except now it's much more visual in terms of location. All the Pushpins are color-coded, so you've got orange for Flickr, and purple for Picasa, red for YouTube, blue for Twitter, stuff like that. And it really just enables you to get a good view and actually begin to drill down with a little bit more precision as to what you're actually looking for. So does anybody recognize this location? Okay. Yeah, this is Infinite Loop. This is Infinite Loop, Cupertino, California, Apple's headquarters, right? And so supposedly, they're very secretive about what goes on in Building 1. right? And we should not be able to conduct a fair level of physical reconnaissance of that building or that area at all because of their vaunted security program, right? We shouldn't be able to do this. So I thought it was a pretty good target to demo Pushpin against, right? And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to target Apple with Pushpin and see what we can find. Now, for those of you that have done full spectrum pen testing or tiger teaming or red teaming before, what are some points of interest when we're doing physical reconnaissance? Or even if you haven't, just throw something out there. What might you want to see? Doors and windows. Okay. Entry control points is definitely the general term one of the general terms I was looking for. So the entry control points is a big one, right? Entry control points is huge. The habits of security forces, maybe. So we want to see the habits, their trends, what they're doing at any given point in time. And then, of course, anything to do with the badging system. So if they have badges used for access or whatever they're using for access to the entry control points, we want to be able to get as much information as we can about that particular system. All right, so we're going to go through each of these. First, let's look at entry control points. So as I started sifting through the data that Pushpin spit back, I found some pictures like this, right? Pictures of the exterior of their entry control points. Some things to highlight here, maybe able to see camera locations, right? So there's a good chance that they've got some sort of video surveillance going on of the entry control points. We've got some still little stand here that looks like it may have an RFID reader on the side of it, possibly a telephone. This could provide us maybe some sort of social engineering against the people at the desk inside the entry control point. Maybe there's some opportunity for social engineering there. But in any case, we've got a view of what the entry control point actually looks like. And if we get really, really lucky, we'll get pictures of people coming in and out of the entry control points and maybe be able to see what the door locks look like, how the mechanisms work, and maybe even catch somebody walking in and out with a badge. How about the inside of the entry control points, right? Really shouldn't be able to see this, but Pushpin drills down and finds some of this information. So some things that stand out here. Not a whole lot in these lower two pictures. Some of the things that stand up in this above picture is this guy over here looks like he could be what? It could be a guard. I mean, he's wearing some sort of black vest on a white T-shirt, and it looks like it could be an armored vest. So maybe they do take security seriously. Could be an armed guard. But in any case, it's what you can see down here. We've got someone sitting at a desk, a receptionist down here. None at this particular entry point. So we're going to look at Pushpin on a map where that entry control point is right there, and maybe highlight that one as a target for tailgating or something like that, because there's no receptionist there that's going to be eyeballing us when we come through the door. Things we want to think about, right? So this one isn't really an entry control point, but it stood out to me. What's significant about this picture? Yeah, so the first thing everybody jumps to is the public terminals. The fact that they're open, the fact that they're logged in. Excuse me. But I would tell you that that's probably VLANed off. All right, it's probably on some restricted VLAN. What stuck out to me as soon as I saw this picture are the TVs hanging from the wall. Those TVs are most likely IP televisions. And anytime I've ever encountered an IP television on a security assessment, they've always had very, very weak access controls between them and the corporate network. It's typically some sort of multicast VLAN that's multicasting media out to these televisions. And they don't really anticipate people plugging into those and checking to see what's there. So there's typically weak access control between that and the corporate network. And I'll plug into one of those TVs or put in a small access point underneath it and plug it in, go sit out in the parking lot, and I've got access to the corporate network. Something that would stand out to me if I was doing a penetration test of this particular company. So what about security forces? So here's some cool stuff, some YouTube videos that popped up. This is Greenpeace got all butthurt about something that Apple was doing in terms of their greenness of their manufacturing facilities, or actually it wasn't manufacturing facilities, it was their data centers actually weren't green enough for Greenpeace. So they came up, created this little iPod, they called it, parked it out in front and started causing a bunch of ruckus, right? And they've got a video of the whole thing. And so one of the things that stuck out to me was the security forces in the video. So these guys they don't look like they're in incredibly good shape, right? Like they're probably not going to catch you in a straight sprint. But they look a little curious up here. They're snooping around and kind of seeing what's going on and taking, like it took them, I think it was at the time there, it took about 3 minutes to get there. Good or bad, depending on the urgency of the call. But then you look down in this picture, and what are they doing? They're standing here with their arms crossed while this chubby dude in a white shirt's jerking on the door, right, trying to get it open. What are these guys doing? I mean, to me, that stood out. Is that proactive? No, that's not proactive. I don't know what they're doing there, but they're just mulling around watching while these other two civilian guys that look like they walked out of the data center to go have lunch are now trying to break into this iPod that's sitting out front. So that kind of begins to tell us stuff, not a whole lot of detail, but a little bit. This is where it gets more telling. So these two guys up here did a video. Basically what they did was they took a road trip to Cupertino, California, and they popped a tent outside Building 1 and camped overnight, just to do it, right? No one said anything to them until the next morning. So the next morning, as they're waking up and coming out of the tent, the security forces walk up to them and say, hey, what are you guys doing? And they're like, we're here to see Apple headquarters. And the guy's like, okay, and drives away in his golf cart or whatever it was, right? So they have this whole video that talks about their encounter, and you get a sense by listening to this that they're not very proactive in terms of perimeter security around the facility. So there's a good likelihood that we'll be able to snoop around a little bit, take some pictures, maybe get close and look at what the locking mechanisms look like on windows and doors and things like that. And then there's this here, which was linked to from one of these other posts that I found on Pushpin. And basically it's a story. It's an article about a guy that was hired by Apple to do a project. And he was working on this project for a couple of months, and Apple canceled it. They disengaged his badge and all of that good stuff, canceled him off the project, and pretty much released him, let him go. Well, he continued for the next 3 months following his release to use his deactivated badge to tailgate into the building and use Apple's resources to finish his project, right? And he tells his story in this particular article. What does that tell you about the security forces there, right? Is it easy to tailgate, right? The badging system, if I can replicate a badge, there's a good chance I can get in and out of the facility. So this is all really, really important information that we would be interested in when conducting physical reconnaissance. And then the final piece is badging. And there's not much words needed here, right?
To make that last story even worse, he actually slept at the Apple offices for 3 months.
Did he? So he lived on campus? Beautiful. That's fantastic, right? So some guy's like really excited that he got employed by Apple and posted a picture of his badge, which is good for us, bad for them, right? And all of this without ever setting foot on the ground. Right? We've never went to location. We've never had to fly out there. We never had to take a risk to do any type of long-range or close-range reconnaissance. We did all this through just the manipulation of geotag social media. So it's pretty powerful stuff. So the goods, first detail about the goods is it used to be all standard libs. So how many people here hate having to install third-party libraries when they're running a Python script? I cannot stand it, right? That irritates me more than just about anything else in our particular industry. Is having to go install CPAN and 30 different Perl modules to get Fierce to work or something like that, right? It's just irritating. So the original version of ReconNG and this version to an extent uses all standard libs. The only thing that doesn't use standard libs is the LinkedIn authenticated module because it requires OAuth, and Python doesn't have a built-in OAuth library. So if you go down and you just pull on this OAuth 2 library, you can just slap that in the same directory. You don't have to install it. Just do a pull down on the repo, put it in the same directory as the script, and it will work just fine. It also requires httplib2. Now, in most of your Linux distributions, that's going to be there already as a standard library, but for whatever reason, OS X does not include it. So if you're using a Mac, you'll need to pull that down as well. Same thing, you can just download the repo, put it straight in the same directory. Recon will work just fine. So I'm going to be tweeting the links to both the repos later on today. For those of you that already have the link to ReconNG, I'll be pushing it. As soon as I get done with the talk, I'll go sit back down there and I'll push it out to the repository. And then I'll be tweeting the link to Pushpin. I would ask that you please leave me your contact information. Do we have a pen and pencil somewhere up here? Doesn't look like it. Drop me a business card, leave me your contact information, and why? Because I do free webcasts on this type of stuff. I write a lot of tools because I love writing stuff in Python, and I would be more than happy to send some of that stuff to you if you leave me your contact information. And here is mine. So before we jump into the next talk, what I want to do is I want to bring Rob Dixon up, and he's going to talk a little bit about, well, I'll let him talk about it. Come on up, Rob.
All right. You guys hear me? All right, good. All right, cool. So real quick, when we were initially developing the tool, we were coming up with some cool scenarios, use cases, or what have you. And so I spent a lot of time using pushpin and going around looking at different critical infrastructures within the state, just making sure there weren't any idiots out there taking pictures and, you know, putting them online or what have you. And I think I probably spent like 5 hours one night just playing around it and found nothing. So I was pretty proud, right? Not a lot of stuff leaked, you know, where I was concerned that it might be. So after about 5 hours, I had this last slide up on the screen, this guy right here. And sorry for those of you at home, should have came to the conference. So I'm sitting back, kind of bored, you know, I'm lost kind of the enthusiasm I had 5 hours earlier, clearly. But as I'm sitting back, I just look up and I see this one little tweet here, little bitch-ass stop sign. I thought, okay, you know, it's kind of funny, a little profanity or what have you. Is that interesting to me? I took another look, and you see right here, it's right in the middle of the road. So I'm thinking, oh, great, all right, so they're tweeting and driving, right? So I'm trying to put a presentation together for probably a couple weeks prior to a presentation I was giving for some DHS folks. I just wanted something cool, something that would get the idea out of how the tool works without showing everybody how to use this particular weapon or weaponizing people, so to speak. So I thought, all right, so this is cool. I've got this, this girl here in the middle of the road tweeting, driving. And then I realized, you know, how can I figure out which direction she went, right? So if I want to find out she's tweeting and driving, what do? Just keep putting the push pin up and down the road each direction for hours until maybe she shows back up on radar? Do I put the radius out to like, you know, 1,000 meters and see if I can find her again? So what happened is I ended up over on another site called TweetPaths. And TweetPaths.com gives you the ability to just put a Twitter handle in there and quickly come back and tell you whether or not they have geotag content. If they do, it'll plot it all. At least, like, I think it's the last 75. It goes through the last 75 tweets, the ones that are geotagged, it will plot it for you. So real quick, I'll show you what it looked like when I took her information and threw it up. So see really quick, we've got a couple of interesting clusters. Down here, it turns out we had a school, and then another cluster up in the top corner there. So here, my handwriting is so terrible. So like, not that interesting, except that, you know, clearly she was in school, possibly underage, overage, not really sure at this point. You know, clearly, I guess if she could do her homework on Twitter, everything would be fine, right? But she has to pick up a pencil and paper and write some shit now, right? So once again, came up in here, found some posts about watching Glee. Thought it was kind of interesting that some of the little posts across the street in the trees, you see that? And back behind the shed up there, behind the house, okay? Kind of interesting here, so she's tweeting out to Weed Humor. I only tweet when I'm high, and I tweet a lot. I'm like, all right, this is getting kind of cool, right? Some investigators will be at the conference. I'm going to have something funny, right? So here you go. Great way to start the day. Well, what do we know? She's tweeting, so she's high, and she's in the middle of the road, so, right? Okay. If this is your kid, you're failing, by the way. But so go a little bit further, and I find this picture. I find that there's the ability to, if she's tweeting to someone, right within the balloon, I have the ability to just add them to the map. So everyone she tweeted to, I just tried to add them. Add them, and it would come up, and I get a little red thing on the side. No geotag content for this user. And in the end, I found this guy, and they had a lot of communications back and forth. The clusters were matching up on the map. I thought, all right, well, I'm going to look at this relationship. So this is what we found. See? You guys see this? This goes in here, and this, right? And when you're done, your lollipop, right? So I thought this is kind of funny. Let's keep going with it. What's that? I'm not sure. They went to McDonald's first. Doesn't make sense, right? So, kind of cool here. Comments. That's all we need. And a handful of likes. Kind of interesting, right? Not really surprised. If anybody knows the area and they saw where those plots were, that was Boone County. If you're from around here, we get some laughter, right? So once again, I pulled it back a little bit and look where they are. You notice the tweet? We're at the dead people place. So that was the top of the tombstone. You guys notice this up in the top corner? What's that look like? Like a leopard print? All right? Okay, so I put my data together, put my slides together, and of course, Tim and I are still working as well, trying to pull some content together for his DerbyCon presentation. So I thought I'd come back, try to find some more stuff, and failed on the physical side, which was a win for us, right? Because there wasn't a lot of junk out there. So decided to come back over and see what these guys were doing. First thing I did was went to the kid that's posting the dope pictures, right? Thinking I'm going to get some more trophy shots here. And all of this stuff was gone. So within TweetPads, you have the ability to filter by time. So I started going back in time. The stuff I had the other day was gone as well. I'm like, all right, well, the idiot posted the picture, somebody figured it out, and he went out and deleted his shit. So let me go back and see what the girl's doing. So instead of spending thousands of dollars on your hopes and dreams, you can spend $35 on some Everclear and get fucked up. All right, anybody see the time? 18 minutes after midnight. You see where the pin is? Along the railroad tracks on the side of the river there, looks like. Can you see it? Yeah. There it is. Okay, so I'm not sure what the $35 was for, but anyway, this is where they like to get fucked up. So somewhere outside of that high school in Boone County, I'm sure, the little drum circle happening in the woods there. So I see that she likes to make collages. I'm like, all right, that's interesting. I'm not really a big collage person. This one's kind of busy, like 10 shots or whatever, but whoo, look what we got. Pretty good. Remember the thing we put in the thing, and then hanging out of his mouth right there. And then, of course, lollipops in her mouth, so she must have been helping out, right? Right? See the phone and the skirt and the pants? And then I saw his tank top, and I said, well, I don't judge. So anyway, that's pretty much it. I just want to give you a little applied there. Delivered that for some investigators. I think some of them are in the audience today just waiting to get a copy of the tool because I've been telling them no for 3 weeks because Tim won't release it till here. So anyhow, everybody look up at the screen, please. All right. Cool. So a couple more things. Yeah, keep going. That's okay. On Recon, the output file that you get, I found was really useful to take it over to a new tool that Chris John Riley put out recently called Scythe, S-C-Y-T-H-E. Essentially it takes a user string or an email address or username, and it'll go out and hit a handful of social media sites and see if there's an indicator whether or not the email address was used. To S-C-Y-T-H-E is the name of the tool. I think it's on GitHub maybe. Chris John Riley was the author. So essentially take the output of one tool, and it's easy to write a little wrapper in Bash or something to go hit it, cut the CSV output, and feed it over into Skype. And I find that a lot of times on some of my assessments, I'll take the corporate email addresses and run them through these systems to determine whether there's an indicator that they use their corporate email to register for their social media sites, which means they likely check it from work, right? So from a social engineering standpoint, if it's within scope, it might be an interesting vector instead of creating phishing emails to maybe just start direct messaging them. Something else I was going to say. Find me later if you have some questions or what have you, and I've got some other use cases I'd be glad to share. Anyway, that's all you.
That's it.
That's it.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?